Honestly, have you ever heard a religious argument that for just a moment made you pause and think, that actually sounds pretty good? Don't worry, you're not alone. Arguments like the first cause, the argument from design, or appeals to morality have been polished over centuries. They are often elegant, emotionally resonant, and designed to sound profound. But like a mirage, they shimmer with the promise of substance, only to dissolve into hot air upon closer inspection. They are riddled with logical fallacies, hidden assumptions, and philosophical sleight of hand. This video is your toolkit for intellectual self-defense. We will equip you to spot the weaknesses in these common apologetics, not just to win debates, but to build a more resilient and consistent worldview for yourself. These arguments can also be regional. In the comments, tell us which religious argument you hear most often where you live. To sharpen your thinking and never be caught off guard again, be sure to like this video and subscribe. The granddaddy of them all, the argument from design. Perhaps no religious argument has captured the popular imagination quite like the argument from design, also known as the teleological argument. It is elegant, intuitive, and deeply appealing to our pattern-seeking brains. The classic formulation, made immortal by the 18th century Christian apologist William Paley, goes something like this. Imagine you are walking across a field and you stumble upon a stone. You might reasonably conclude that the stone has lain there forever, a product of natural, mindless forces. But what if instead you found a watch? You would never assume the watch had simply materialized there. You would observe its intricate gears, its delicate hands, all working in perfect synchrony to perform a specific function, telling time. The sheer complexity and purposefulness of the watch would force you to conclude that it must have had a watchmaker. Someone intelligent, someone with foresight and intent, must have designed and assembled it. Paley then makes his grand leap. Look around you, he says. The universe, and particularly life, is infinitely more complex than any watch. The human eye, with its lens, retina, and optic nerve, is a marvel of biological engineering. The celestial mechanics of our solar system, with planets orbiting the sun in predictable, stable paths, seems to run like cosmic clockwork. Therefore, just as the watch implies a watchmaker, this vast, intricate universe must imply a grand, intelligent designer. A cosmic watchmaker. God. On the surface, it's a powerful analogy. It feels right. We see apparent design, so we infer a designer. It's the intellectual equivalent of a warm blanket on a cold night. But the warmth is deceptive because the entire argument rests on a foundation of sand. A profoundly flawed analogy, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the forces that actually shape our world. The first and most devastating blow to the watchmaker argument came not from a philosopher, but from a naturalist. Charles Darwin, with his theory of evolution by natural selection, didn't just offer an alternative. He provided a powerful, evidence-based mechanism that explains the illusion of design without a designer. Natural selection is, as the biologist Richard Dawkins so brilliantly termed it, the blind watchmaker. It has no foresight, no plan, no conscious goal. It is a simple, relentless, algorithmic process that, over immense spans of time, can produce staggering complexity. Here's how it works, in essence. First, you have a random variation. In every population of living things, there are small, heritable differences between individuals, caused by random mutations in their genetic code. Second, you have selection. The environment presents challenges: predators, climate change, competition for resources. Individuals whose random variations happen to give them a slight survival or reproductive advantage are, on average, more likely to live long enough to pass on those advantageous traits to their offspring. The ones without those traits are more likely to be weeded out. Repeat this process over millions upon millions of generations, and the result is the gradual accumulation of features that are exquisitely well adapted to their environment. The eye did not spring into existence fully formed, like a watch from a factory. It began perhaps as a simple patch of light-sensitive cells. Any mutation that made this patch slightly more concave would offer a slight advantage, allowing the organism to better sense the direction of light. Over eons, this concavity could deepen, a primitive lens could form, an iris could develop to control the amount of light. Each step was small, unguided, and conferred a tiny survival benefit, but compounded over geological time, the result is the complex organ we know today. It looks designed for seeing, but it was sculpted, not designed, by the unforgiving pressures of survival. In fact, if we look closely, the design of life is often remarkably clumsy, full of bugs and bizarre workarounds that no intelligent designer would ever implement. The recurrent laryngeal nerve in giraffes is a classic example. This nerve connects the brain to the larynx, but instead of taking a direct route of a few inches, it travels all the way down the neck, loops around a major artery near the heart, and then travels all the way back up to the larynx. In a full-grown giraffe, this is a detour of over 15 feet. It's an absurdly inefficient path, a relic of our fishy ancestors where the route was direct. As the neck elongated over evolutionary history, the nerve was hooked and had to stretch along with it. A divine engineer would have rerouted it. The blind, indifferent process of evolution simply stretched what was already there. The human eye itself, Paley's prize exhibit, is wired backwards, with its photoreceptors sitting behind a layer of neurons and blood vessels, creating a blind spot where the optic nerve passes through the retina. It's a design that would get any first-year engineering student a failing grade. Modern proponents of the design argument, aware of the power of evolution, have shifted their goalposts. They now champion a concept called irreducible complexity, most famously associated with biochemist Michael B. The argument is that some biological systems, like the bacterial flagellum, a tiny whip-like motor that propels certain bacteria, are so complex that they couldn't have evolved step by step. Remove any one of its dozens of protein parts, they claim, and the entire motor ceases to function. Therefore, it must have been assembled all at once by an intelligent agent. It's like a mousetrap. Take away the spring, the hammer, or the platform, and you don't have a less effective mousetrap. You have no mousetrap at all. This too has been thoroughly and repeatedly refuted by the scientific community. The flaw lies in the false assumption that the components of a complex system could have had no other function before they became part of the final product. Biologists have shown that many of the protein components of the bacterial flagellum are homologous to, or very similar to, proteins that exist in other, simpler bacterial systems that perform entirely different functions, like a syringe-like mechanism for injecting toxins into other cells. Evolution is a master tinkerer, not a grand architect. It hijacks existing parts and repurposes them for new functions, a process called exaptation. It's like taking the engine from a lawnmower, the wheels from a skateboard, and the frame of a bicycle to build a rudimentary go-kart. None of the parts were originally for a go-kart, but they can be co-opted and combined to create something new. The claim of irreducible complexity is, at its heart, an argument from personal incredulity. It says, I can't imagine how this could have evolved, therefore it didn't. This is not a scientific argument. It is a confession of a failure of imagination. Finally, even if we were to be extraordinarily generous and grant the entire premise of the argument, let's say we agree for a moment that the universe shows signs of design, what have we actually proven? We have inferred the existence of a designer, but what kind of designer? The argument tells us nothing about its nature. It could be a single, omnipotent, benevolent God. Or it could be a committee of bickering deities. It could be a deeply malevolent entity that designed a universe full of suffering for its own amusement. It could be a cosmic student who scraped by with a C- on their universe creation final project. It could be a super advanced alien civilization running a simulation. The argument from design provides no logical path whatsoever to the specific, personal, prayer-answering God of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or any other established religion. To make that leap is to abandon the logic the argument claims to be based on and simply revert to an unsubstantiated assertion of faith. The argument from design, in all its forms, is a beautiful and seductive illusion. It mistakes the product of an indifferent, algorithmic, natural process for the handiwork of a thinking mind. It's an artifact of a pre-scientific age that survives today, not because of its logical or evidentiary strength, but because it so perfectly confirms what believers already wish to be true. The cosmic shell game. The Kalam cosmological argument. If the argument from design is the poet of religious apologetics, appealing to our sense of wonder, then the cosmological argument is its stern logician, appealing to our sense of reason. It purports to be a cold, hard, deductive proof for the existence of a first cause, which is then, rather conveniently, identified as God. There are many versions of this argument, but the one most frequently wielded in modern debates is the Kalam cosmological argument, famously popularized by philosopher and apologist William Lane Craig. It is structured as a simple three-line syllogism that seems, at first glance, to be irrefutable. 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. From there, the apologist concludes that this cause must be an uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, and tremendously powerful personal agent. In other words, God. It sounds formidable, doesn't it? It has the clean, crisp feel of a mathematical equation. But like a shell game on a city street, its apparent simplicity hides a series of slick maneuvers and questionable assumptions. Let's look under the shells. First, let's examine premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. This seems like common sense, an indisputable truth of our reality. A sculptor causes a statue to exist. A baker causes a cake to exist. We have never in our entire lives seen a bicycle or a skyscraper or a sandwich pop into being from absolute nothingness without a cause. Our everyday experience confirms this premise a million times over. The problem is that our everyday experience takes place in the macroscopic world, governed by the laws of classical physics. The origin of the universe, however, is a realm governed by a completely different set of rules, the bizarre, counterintuitive laws of quantum mechanics. To apply our common-sense billiard ball causality to the unique and extreme conditions of the Big Bang is an act of breathtaking over-extrapolation. It's like observing that no fish can survive on dry land, and concluding therefore that no life of any kind can exist outside of water. In the quantum realm, the very concept of causality becomes fuzzy. For instance, the phenomenon of radioactive decay is a causal at the level of the individual atom. We can know that in a given sample, a certain number of atoms will decay over a certain period, but we can never predict which specific atom will decay at which specific moment. There is no immediate preceding cause for that individual event. It is fundamentally probabilistic, not deterministic. Furthermore, our most advanced physics suggests that things can emerge from what is effectively nothing, at least in the quantum sense. Virtual particles, for example, are pairs of particles and antiparticles that flicker into and out of existence in the quantum vacuum for incredibly brief periods of time. The quantum vacuum is not a true void of absolute nothingness, but a roiling sea of potential from which energy and matter can spontaneously arise in accordance with the laws of physics. So, is it truly a settled fact that whatever begins to exist has a cause? From the perspective of modern physics, the answer is a resounding not necessarily. The premise is an intuition, not an ironclad law that can be reliably applied to the birth of the cosmos. Now, let's move to the second shell, premise 2. The universe began to exist. This is usually supported by pointing to the scientific consensus on the Big Bang theory. The evidence for an expanding universe originating from an incredibly hot, dense state around 13.8 billion years ago is overwhelming. So, case closed, right? The universe had a beginning, but again, this is a subtle misrepresentation of what the science actually says. The Big Bang theory describes the beginning of the universe as we know it. It marks the starting point of space, time, matter, and energy in their current expansive phase. It does not, however, necessarily describe a beginning from absolute metaphysical nothingness. The question, what came before the Big Bang, might be as nonsensical as asking, what is north of the North Pole? Since time itself began at the Big Bang, the concept of before may be logically incoherent. But even setting that aside, a number of cosmological models, all consistent with current data, propose scenarios where our Big Bang was not an absolute beginning. There are cyclical models like the Big Bounce, which suggest our universe is part of an endless series of expansions and contractions. There are multiverse models like eternal inflation, which propose that our universe is just one bubble, that nucleated from a much larger, eternally existing multiverse foam. Physicists like Stephen Hawking and Lawrence Krauss have proposed models where the universe could arise from quantum fluctuations in a pre-existing state, governed by physical laws, a universe from nothing, where nothing again means the quantum vacuum, not a philosophical void. So the point is not that any one of these models is definitively proven. The point is that science has not, in fact, concluded that the universe began to exist from absolute nothingness. It is only concluded that our current expansion had a starting point. To state flatly that the universe began to exist is to present a highly contested and unresolved issue in theoretical physics as a settled fact, simply because it's a necessary step in the apologist's syllogism. Finally, we come to the conclusion which is where the real trickery happens. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and this cause is God. Even if we are incredibly charitable and grant both flawed premises for the sake of argument, let's say the universe did have a cause, the Kalam argument commits its greatest intellectual sin, a monumental leap of faith disguised as a logical step. What can we deduce about this cause based purely on the logic? It would have to be outside of time and space, since it created time and space. It would have to be immensely powerful, but that's it. That is all the argument gives you. A timeless, spaceless, powerful cause. The argument gives you absolutely no reason to believe this cause is personal, that it is intelligent, that it is conscious, that it is benevolent, that it is a single being rather than a multiplicity of forces, or that it has any interest whatsoever in the affairs of humanity, on a tiny planet orbiting an average star in an unremarkable galaxy. The apologist simply tacks on all these additional attributes, intelligence, personhood, goodness, with no justification at all. They perform an act of semantic smuggling, packing the word God with all the baggage of their specific theology and then slapping it onto the term first cause, as if they were one and the same. It's a bait and switch of cosmic proportions. Why couldn't the first cause be a set of impersonal natural laws of quantum gravity that we don't yet understand? Why couldn't it be a mindless, chaotic force that happened to have universe-generating properties? The Kalam argument provides no mechanism to get from an abstract metaphysical principle to the specific, loving, judgmental, prayer-hearing God of the Bible or the Quran. It's a bridge to nowhere. This is a tactic you see again and again. The argument starts with an appeal to seemingly neutral logic or science. But when the time comes to connect that logic to a specific religious conclusion, the reasoning is abandoned in favor of a bald assertion. So here's a question for you all. The Kalam argument attempts to build a logical bridge from a simple observation to a very specific deity. When you've encountered this or similar arguments, how often does the speaker actually try to justify that final enormous leap from a first cause to their particular God? Or do they, as is often the case, simply state the syllogism, and then assume you'll make that jump with them, as if it were the most obvious step in the world? Share your experiences of this cosmic shell game in the comments below. It's an instructive look at how rhetoric often takes the place of reason when the stakes are this high. The moral high ground. We now arrive at an argument that moves from the cosmos to our conscience. The argument from morality. It is in many ways more intimate and more challenging than the previous two, because it speaks not of distant galaxies or abstract causes, but of the very fabric of our lived experience. The argument, powerfully articulated by thinkers like C.S. Lewis, begins with a deceptively simple observation. Human beings across all cultures and all times seem to have an innate sense of right and wrong. We feel we ought to behave in certain ways. We believe that compassion is good and cruelty is evil, that fairness is a virtue and treachery a vice. Even when we fail to live up to these standards, we feel their pull. Lewis called this the law of human nature. The argument then proceeds like this. This universal, objective moral law must have a source. A law requires a lawgiver. Fleeting whims of culture or the cold mechanics of evolution cannot account for our sense of an absolute, binding ought. Therefore, this objective moral law must be grounded in a transcendent, personal, and morally perfect being. A divine lawgiver. God. This argument resonates because it touches upon something deeply human. Our yearning for meaning and justice in a world that often seems to lack both. The idea that our deepest moral intuitions are not just chemical quirks or social conventions, but echoes of a divine standard is profoundly comforting. And yet, like a beautiful statue with a fatal crack running through its core, this argument shatters under the pressure of a single ancient question. It is a question first posed by Plato in his dialogue, the Euthyphro, and it remains the single most devastating challenge to divine command theory ever conceived. The question is this: is something morally good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? Let this sink in, because within this dilemma, the entire moral argument unravels. Let's explore the two horns of this dilemma. First, suppose that something is good simply because God commands it. This position is known as voluntarism. It means that morality is entirely dependent on God's will. Whatever God decrees is, by definition, good. This seems to ground morality firmly in God, but it comes at a terrible price. It makes morality completely arbitrary. If God were to command tomorrow that we must inflict pain for pleasure, or that envy is a virtue and love a sin, then those things would become morally good. The statement "God is good" becomes an empty tautology, a meaningless phrase. It simply means God does what God does, or God wills what God wills. It strips the word goodness of any independent meaning, reducing it to mere raw power and our fawning obedience to it. This is not a foundation for morality. It is a recipe for divine tyranny, where might makes right on a cosmic scale. Most thoughtful believers find this conclusion morally repugnant, and rightly so. So they are forced to grab the other horn of the dilemma. God commands something because it is good. This sounds much better. It means God, in his infinite wisdom, recognizes what is good and then commands us to do it. But look closely at what has just happened. If God commands things because they are already good, then that means there is a standard of goodness that exists independently of God. A goodness is not something God invents. It's something God himself consults. In this scenario, God is no longer the source of morality, but rather a cosmic moral messenger, a supremely reliable guide to a moral reality that transcends even him. This rescues the meaning of goodness, but it completely guts the moral argument. The argument's entire purpose was to show that God is necessary as the source or foundation of objective morality. This horn of the dilemma demonstrates that he is not. Morality stands on its own. So, if morality doesn't come from a divine lawgiver, where does it come from? Does that mean we must be nihilists, adrift in a sea of moral relativism? Absolutely not. It simply means the source is closer to home. We can find the well springs of morality in the confluence of our evolved nature and our capacity for reason. Evolution by natural selection, acting on social creatures like us, would have favored certain predispositions. Empathy, the ability to feel another's pain, altruism, especially towards kin and those who might reciprocate, a sense of fairness, crucial for maintaining group cohesion, and an aversion to causing gratuitous harm. All these are pro-social behaviors that would have helped our fragile tribal ancestors survive and thrive. A group that cooperates, cares for its young, and establishes systems of trust will always outcompete a group of deceitful, selfish individuals. These evolved intuitions are the raw material of morality. But we are more than just our evolutionary programming. We also possess reason. We can reflect upon our intuitions, abstract them into principles, and build coherent ethical systems. Through reason, we can expand our circle of moral concern beyond our immediate tribe to encompass all of humanity and even other sentient beings. We can understand that if I value my own well-being and freedom from suffering, then consistency demands that I recognize that other conscious beings value theirs as well. From this simple recognition, we can derive principles of humanism and secular ethics based on flourishing, well-being, and the minimization of harm. This is a far more robust and adaptable foundation for morality than the unchangeable and often deeply problematic edicts found in ancient texts. After all, if the holy books are the direct word of our divine lawgiver, then we must contend with the fact that this lawgiver seems to command slavery, endorse genocide, and prescribe the death penalty for everything from picking up sticks on the Sabbath to being a disobedient child. The truth is that even the most devout believers today do not get their morality from their scriptures. They bring their pre-existing modern moral sensibilities to their scriptures and cherry-pick the parts that align with what they already feel is right, while ignoring or laboriously reinterpreting the parts that are now, thankfully, considered monstrous. They are using the Euthyphro dilemma in practice, whether they realize it or not. The ghost in the machine. We have now examined arguments from the external world of design, from the abstract realm of logic, and from the shared space of morality. We now turn inward to the most personal, the most powerful, and often the last bastion of belief when all other arguments have failed. The argument from personal experience. This is the argument that says, logic and science are all well and good, but I know God is real because I have felt His presence. It is the testimony of the saved, the prayer answered, the miracle witnessed, the ineffable feeling of peace that descends during worship, the quiet voice that speaks to the heart in a moment of crisis. This is not an argument presented in a syllogism. It is a story, a lived experience. And for the person who has had it, it is often more compelling than any philosophical proof or scientific evidence. To dismiss it out of hand is to dismiss the person themselves, and that is not our goal here. The feelings are real, the experiences are powerful. The question is not whether the experience happened. The question is whether the interpretation of that experience is correct. The fundamental weakness of the argument from personal experience is its subjectivity. It is private, non-transferable, and non-falsifiable. If I tell you I feel the presence of the Holy Spirit in this room right now, you have no way to verify or disprove my claim. You can only take my word for it. But evidence that requires you to simply trust the claimant is not evidence in any meaningful sense of the word. Science and reason are public enterprises. They rely on data and logic that can be examined, tested, and replicated by anyone. Personal revelation is the very opposite of that. It is a sealed box to which only one person holds the key. Furthermore, we now have a deep and growing understanding of the cognitive and neurological mechanisms that can produce these profound spiritual experiences. Our brains are not passive recorders of objective reality. They are active, interpretive engines, hardwired with biases and heuristics that helped us survive on the African savanna, but which can easily misfire in our modern quest for truth. One of the most powerful of these is our hyperactive agency detection device. Humans are pattern seekers, and most of all, we are agent seekers. It was evolutionarily advantageous to assume that a rustle in the bushes was a lion and not just the wind. The cost of a false positive, thinking the wind is a lion, is a moment of panic. The cost of a false negative, thinking a lion is the wind, is death. As a result, we evolved to see agency, intention, and purpose everywhere, even where none exists. We see faces in clouds, we curse at our computers for deliberately crashing, and we attribute a fortunate coincidence, finding a lost set of keys after a moment of desperate prayer, to the direct intervention of a benevolent cosmic agent. Add to this the power of confirmation bias. We actively seek out and give more weight to experiences that confirm our existing beliefs, while ignoring or explaining away those that do not. If you believe prayer works, you will vividly remember the one time you prayed for a job and got an offer the next week. You will conveniently forget the countless other times you or others prayed for something: for a sick relative to be healed, for an end to a war, for a sports team to win, and the prayer went unanswered. The hits are recorded as miracles. The misses are rationalized as God's mysterious plan or a failure of faith. The deck is always stacked in favor of belief. Moreover, the brain itself is an electrochemical organ capable of generating an astonishing range of experiences. Neuroscientists can induce out-of-body experiences, feelings of profound oneness with the universe, and the sense of a felt presence by stimulating specific parts of the brain, particularly the temporal lobes. Meditation, chanting, fasting, sensory deprivation, extreme stress, and even certain rhythmic music can alter brain chemistry and induce states that feel profoundly spiritual and transcendent. These are real neurological events, but to leap from my brain generated a powerful feeling of connection and meaning to, therefore an invisible supernatural being from the ancient Middle East was communicating with me, is to append a massive unsupported conclusion onto a purely natural phenomenon. The final and perhaps most conclusive refutation of personal experience as a reliable guide to truth is the problem of contradictory revelations. A devout Christian in Nashville has a tearful, life-changing experience where he feels the undeniable presence of Jesus Christ. A devout Muslim in Cairo during prostration and prayer feels an overwhelming sense of peace and the absolute certainty of Allah's oneness. A devout Hindu in Varanasi has a profound meditative vision of Shiva. All of these individuals are completely sincere. All of their experiences are, to them, utterly self-authenticating. Yet, their theological claims are mutually exclusive. Jesus cannot be the only begotten Son of God if Allah is one and has no son, and neither can be true if reality is a cycle of reincarnation governed by karma. If personal experience is a reliable pathway to objective truth, it should lead different people to the same truth. The fact that it leads sincere, intelligent people to wildly contradictory conclusions proves that it is not a reliable method. It is a powerful reflection of one's own psychology, culture, and pre-existing beliefs, not a clear window into the nature of reality. It is evidence of the ghost in the machine, not a ghost outside of it. The ultimate insurance policy. Finally, let us consider an argument that abandons all pretense of proof and instead offers a pragmatic calculation. This is Pascal's wager, conceived by the 17th century French polymath Blaise Pascal. He argued that since human reason is incapable of proving or disproving the existence of God, we are forced to make a bet. The choice is not optional. To live is to wager. The bet is laid out in a simple decision matrix. If you wager that God exists and you believe and you are right, you win an infinite reward, eternal bliss in heaven. If you wager that God exists and you are wrong, your loss is finite and trivial. You may have given up a few earthly pleasures or wasted some time on Sundays. On the other hand, if you wager that God does not exist and you are wrong, you suffer an infinite loss, eternal damnation in hell. If you wager that God does not exist and you are right, your gain is merely finite, the freedom of a secular life. Looking at this grid, Pascal concluded that any rational gambler would choose to believe the potential for infinite gain, however small the probability, must always outweigh any finite loss. And the risk of infinite loss, however small the probability, must always be avoided. It is, in essence, an argument for buying cosmic fire insurance. This argument has a certain clever, almost cynical appeal, but it is riddled with flaws so profound that they render the wager not just unpersuasive, but absurd. The most glaring and famous flaw is the many gods objection. Pascal's wager presumes there are only two options on the table: the Christian God or nothing. But which God are we supposed to wager on? The world has produced thousands of gods and religions, all with their own sets of rewards and punishments. What if the true God is Zeus, who is infuriated by those who worship the God of Abraham? What if the true God is a deistic being who rewards rational skepticism and punishes credulous, self-interested belief? What if the true God demands you believe in him and also wear a funny hat on Tuesdays, and you miss that crucial detail? By betting on the specific God of Pascal's Catholicism, you are simultaneously betting against thousands of other gods. The wager doesn't solve the problem of uncertainty, it multiplies it. You could be buying fire insurance from a company that only covers floods while angering the god of volcanoes. Second is the problem of inauthentic belief. The wager assumes that belief is like flipping a switch, but is it? Can you truly will yourself to be convinced of something you find no evidence for? You can certainly pretend to believe. You can go through the motions, attend the services, and profess the creed. But an omniscient God, one who knows the contents of your heart, would surely see through this cynical, self-serving charade. Is such a God likely to reward a faith that is not a genuine conviction, but a craven hedge against damnation? Many theological traditions would argue that such a hollow, fear-based belief is worthless, perhaps even insulting to the divine. Pascal's wager, at best, is an argument for hypocrisy, not for genuine faith. Lastly, the wager dramatically downplays the cost of believing. Pascal dismisses it as a finite and trivial loss, but is it? To adopt a belief system you find irrational means sacrificing your intellectual integrity, a high price for any thinking person. Depending on the religion in question, it could mean dedicating immense amounts of time, money, and emotional energy. It could mean living with unnecessary guilt and fear. It could mean accepting dogmas that are harmful to women, to minorities, or to scientific progress. It could mean alienating yourself from loved ones who do not share your wager. This is not a trivial cost. This is your one and only life. To spend it in service of a proposition you don't genuinely find convincing, just as an insurance policy against a very specific version of hell, is a tragic waste. Pascal's wager is not a path to truth. It is an invitation to intellectual and moral cowardice, dressed up in the language of probability. Conclusion. We have walked through the grand halls of apologetics, from the cosmic argument from design to the logical shell game of the first cause, to the intimate appeals to morality and personal experience, and finally to the gambler's plea of Pascal's wager. A common thread runs through them all. They are arguments that seem persuasive from a distance, but which dissolve upon closer inspection. They rely on flawed analogies, faulty premises, logical leaps, and a profound misunderstanding of science, psychology, and a priori philosophy. The purpose of this channel of the God Mirage is not to replace one set of certainties with another. It is to champion the process of questioning itself. It is to cultivate an intellectual immune system strong enough to identify and reject claims that are not supported by evidence and sound reasoning. Building a worldview is a lifelong project. It should be constructed with the strongest materials available: intellectual honesty, critical thinking, empirical evidence, and a deep-seated compassion grounded not in divine command, but in our shared humanity. If this kind of critical exploration is what you're looking for, please consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss our future investigations. Like this video if you found it valuable, and share it with someone who might benefit from these tools of thought. And for a final point of discussion, leave a comment below. Which of these classic arguments do you encounter most often in your own life? And which one do you personally find the most frustrating or fallacious to address? Let's continue the conversation. Thank you for thinking with me.